the Coffee Shack and the Stay Mental Health campaign. Today I'm talking to Marie from SOSAD and the subject matter is suicide. Hi Marie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, thank you for coming in. Thanks a lot. So can you tell me how suicide has affected you?
Well, I suppose I should start off. In 2008, my son Brian was 17 years of age and unfortunately he took his own life. And at that time, you didn't really hear of a lot of suicides. They did happen, but you didn't necessarily always hear about them. And but we, from the very beginning, let everybody know that it was suicide. And it was just really hard because I knew he was struggling beforehand. I had tried really, really hard to get him the help he needed. And unfortunately, that didn't work out. Being honest, when I look back on it, I didn't really believe he was going to kill himself. It sounds really strange, but I wish I had known then what I know now. You know, he was a bit of a devil. I mean, he wasn't, often when people die, they become these perfect people. My son wasn't a perfect person. I have always described him as being a monkey, but he was my monkey. And in some ways he was, he was the most lovable guy, very attached to me. Was different. I have 3 other children. He's 2 older sisters and a younger brother. And he certainly was different to the other 3. And that was going back from the day I think he was conceived. His whole outlook with everybody. He was a little boy. He felt that adults should respect him and things like that. And he couldn't understand why adults could say what they liked to him, but he felt they're disrespecting me, so why should I respect them, and things like that. So, he was a bit of a monkey, as I say, but it was an awful shock at the end of the day.
And what kind of struggles was he having?
As I said, he was different to the other 3 in the sense he was just a totally different personality. What worked with them as your girls, being the mother and that type of thing, didn't work with him. So he was, everything was very black and white with him. I had tried to get him help over the years. He was dyslexic, tried to get him help over the years, but he was unfortunately kept falling through the cracks. And then when he was about 15, I remember he started doing some weed. And it was really strange because most people think that when they smoke weed, that will relax you and all the rest. But he had the opposite effect from actually made him quite aggressive. So, and in that year, when once he hit 15, it was nearly like as if he was trying to, because I remember having the conversation with him one time, why are you trying to experience everything in your life all together? That's what it felt like. And so through various things that had happened, he had of course tried to eat and different things like that. He had stopped everything and had decided he wanted to go into the army. Passed the physical and then went to do the medical and failed it because they said he was colourblind. He was quite unlucky as a person through his short life. So I decided that I would get his eyes tested, and when I did, 2 opticians did his eyes and said he wasn't colourblind. So I had in my head try and see if I could fight this, and his father had been in the army, and I think there was always that thing where he wanted his dad to be proud of him, and that type of thing. And he had times. As times went on, I started to notice a build-up of his anger, and it was becoming it was affecting the whole family. He wouldn't always be aware afterwards of, not that he wasn't aware, but it was nearly like as if he was shocked of the way he behaved.
Mm.
You know, so I had done what you're supposed to do. I'd gone to my GP, and we got him involved in CAMS at one stage. And to be honest with you, they kept pushing, kept saying, "Oh no, we won't take him on now." It ended up that there was a disagreement between CAMS and adult mental health, because when Brian died, he was 6 weeks off his 18th birthday, and they kept saying that when he's 18, we can sort it out.
Mm.
But unfortunately, that never happened. So, yeah, it was just that build up. And in the middle of all this, on the 30th of July, my father lived with us, and my father died. And I look back on that now, and I realise that sometimes a bereavement in the family can have a massive effect. It can actually affect somebody that's feeling suicidal. Mm. So when I look back at that time, I think of the things that we say to each other about grief. So we were saying about my father, for instance, my father's happy now, which implied he wasn't happy when he was alive, which that wasn't true.
Right.
Okay. We were saying things, he's with Maureen now, so he's really happy. That was my mum. And so you have all these things that we say to placate ourselves and to kind of make ourselves, that's just run-of-the-mill things. Mm. But a long time after, years later, I realised that when we're saying all these things, if you're not in a good headspace and you're feeling suicidal, and you hear that if I die, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to be with people. So it was all that sort of thing. So he did take medication about 2.5 weeks before he died. And he basically, you know what, I think the saddest thing was how scared he was. And I remember he was in the hospital and there were 2 guards outside, and he thought they were there to keep him in. But they weren't. They picked somebody else up. Actually, a man on a bicycle that had cans, and that's why they were there.
Right.
And when they left, he ran out of the hospital. And he was frightened. And it cut a long story short, we eventually got all that sorted out. And then that was the middle of August. And then on the 8th of September, it was a Sunday, and I had been upstairs reading. I heard him coming up the stairs, didn't come into me or anything. Went to his room, and I had a neighbour come in for a cup of tea. I went upstairs to iron, and I had assumed that he was asleep because he had been in Taboo the night before. And so I opened the bedroom door, and I found he had hung himself. Mm. So the most horrible thing of it was, there was a part of me when that happened was that I was surprised I didn't scream or do any of that. I was actually quite calm. And I remember thinking, I can't believe you actually did it. Mm. But there was nobody else around except myself. My younger son was only 14 at the time, so I didn't want him to see anything. So I asked him to go in and get my neighbour, Stephen, who was a guard. And it transpired, it felt like Stephen wasn't coming quick enough. And just strange things happened. When my father had died, because we had young children living next door, so I didn't want them frightened of death. So we had, when my dad died, a Harry party.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I went out to get Stephen to come in and help me with Brian, one of the little children came up, it was about 3.
Yeah.
And he said to me, somebody else dead in your house, Marie.
He said what?
Somebody else. Is there somebody else dead in your house, Marie?
Really?
And I couldn't answer him.
Yeah.
And so I called Stephen. I said to Stephen, I need you now. So Stephen came up, and I didn't want anybody else to see Brian as I had found him.
Yeah.
So then you had the guards, the ambulance, all that sort of thing. And she then contacted my husband and my 2 daughters. And I remember only a few years ago, my daughters saying that when they were in the car, they didn't know what had happened, but when they turned in to go into our road, all they could see were ambulances, guards, neighbours, this whole thing in front of them. And I'm told that when my daughter I think the car was still going when she was trying to get out of it, that she was so stressed, so they didn't know what had happened. And then, the guards tried to stop them coming in, so I had to go down and let them come up and things like that. But in some ways, I think it was harder for them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the fact that they weren't in the house and stuff like that. But funny, my younger son says to me, "You never tell me what happened. I just assumed I had told him." But he didn't know straight away what happened. Then my husband came home, see, with all this stuff going on.
Yeah.
And then a doctor had to come to declare him dead, stuff like that. And
how does it affect people afterwards? How does it?
First and foremost, the shock is just, I can't put into words what it feels like. Total disbelief. I think in a way, probably it's a good thing our bodies go into shock, because I don't think we'd be able to actually face up to it. We all dealt with it differently. Like I said, I had 3 other children, 2 girls that were older, and as I said, Michael was only 14, and my husband, and it was, I always remember thinking I felt like as if part of me had died. And that's true, because they say your heart breaks.
Yeah.
My heart broke.
Gosh.
Sorry. So, and the other things about everything was that I felt a massive responsibility for. He was so well known, so I felt this responsibility for all the other kids. And he was buried on the day of the World Suicide Day, which is the 10th of September. And it happened to be the day that the junior cert results came out. The weather was atrocious, and I felt like when the coffin was being put into the ground and stuff, I think he was making a laugh. It was, in the sense, the rain, I've never seen rain like it. I felt that the whole time I kept trying to talk to the young people as much as I could, because my biggest fear was what if one of them tried to do this. So I went on and within kind of 2 months, 2-3 months, I had started doing this type of work.
Yeah.
SOSAD. It affected us all differently. My husband, unfortunately, he took to drink, and he spent probably most weekends trying to kill himself. Yeah. And we went through that for about a year, and I actually left my husband for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't cope.
Yeah.
And it was probably the best thing I ever did in those circumstances. But he did get his act together. He's involved in SOSAD now. But unfortunately, sometimes that's what people do. And everybody goes on their own journey as regards grief. Also within the community itself, his friends, and the community that you live in, it affects so many people. And I think because Brian was one of those first that people knew it was suicide, and that we were open about it and stuff like that, it just affects people. Parents start worrying more. There's always the worry too that somebody else within that circle or community will think this is the answer. I do remember what was it, after the end of the Mass, after communion, a kind of reflection, and my thing was to say to the kids, this is not the answer. Because I firmly believe that had he given life a chance, that his life could have been really, really good.
Yeah.
It's hard because nobody knows how to deal with this. And it's just
like, do you feel a community the community doesn't know how to approach you about it, even after it happened. Or...
There's a lot of stuff to do with that. I mean, I found at the time that going to the shopping centre, for instance, was a nightmare. Most people are really, really kind, and like they're afraid they'll hurt you or whatever. What I would say from my point of view is that I love people to talk about it, and I liked all that. You did have an element of people. Often you would see somebody in the corner of your eye talking to somebody else, and you knew you were the subject of the conversation. And there were times when I was like, please don't let me come and ask me, because sometimes there were people you didn't know. And I suppose the hardest thing was when people asked questions because they were just being nosy. So they might ask, they wanted the ins and outs. I remember when Brian died, and you're relaying the story, the phone was ringing non-stop. And I do remember thinking, maybe I should have taped the story, and then I could have just kept playing it to everybody.
Yeah.
Because there were times I just couldn't say it anymore.
Yeah.
And it was, and the other thing was, I remember when he died too and all around that time was people were looking for a reason.
Yeah.
I didn't know the reason. So in the end, I told people, because people would say, was he depressed? So in the end, I said yes. Because that was a way of
finishing the conversation.
Yeah. It gave them whatever. It also, interesting enough, didn't stop people coming up with their own scenarios. You know what I mean? And so that was hard sometimes too. And it's amazing the amount of people that are related to you that you don't even know. And in fact, I found that really, really weird.
Yeah.
But on the whole, people were brilliant. I think it's there's a whole process. So the identification of the body, you have to do all those official things as well. I had to make a statement. That was really, really hard. I suppose, sorry.
That's fine, no, but how do you think, the media deal with suicide or society? Is there a bit of kind of, in young people's culture, a glorification in a way?
You can have that. You see, I remember somebody, I was actually a priest talking about funerals, and it was talking about funerals in the army. And it's kind of the same type of thing. When somebody gets a good send-off, where it's nearly like an adulation, like you've been adored, even though you're dead. So there can be an element of that. Yeah. Okay, you can have ripple effects, and so you can have maybe families or friends maybe that they're feeling down. You've heard of things like this, and the problem is it's very, very hard to try and find out which person's really at risk and stuff like that. One of the big things that I say to families is, in families we're inclined to try to protect each other. So you will have maybe the children of the family or the father of the family or whatever, and they're all trying to stay strong because they don't want to upset mummy. That type of thing. That's probably the worst thing you can do. You're far better off to turn around and say, look, I'm having a dreadful day today. I'll be fine. But grief is about pain. It is about sorrow. And if you try and put up a barrier, you're stopping everybody else you're making everybody put up their barriers. So acknowledging the fact that what I'm feeling is normal, and that my sadness, all that grief that I have is a very, very normal reaction. And I will be okay. You'll have days where you'll fall apart. You'll have days where you will have 5 different emotions in one day. As regards the media and stuff like that, a lot of people that have lost people to suicide do not like to hear the words committed suicide. And it's interesting, I picked this up very, very quickly when I hear people talk. when you commit something, it's like you've committed a crime or a sin, which it was a crime at one stage and it was a sin. It's no longer that, so they haven't committed. So it's being aware of those things.
Yeah.
Also, it's interesting. I spoke to a psychologist a few years after Brian died, and he raised the whole thing that when it was a sin and when it was a crime, in a way, they were a deterrent.
Yeah.
And when they were removed, there was nothing to replace it. So what he felt was we still needed some sort of deterrent, things to stop people. So he said it was people like myself that had gone through it, letting people know that the pain doesn't end.
Yeah.
And the consequences, and here I am 12 years down the road, it still hurts. So, and I think that's really important, that people realise it isn't a crime. They haven't committed anything, be a crime or a sin. And for everyone, newspapers, for the community in general, to be wary of speculation and rumours. It's strange what people, the rumours was when Brian died was that he had a heroin overdose or something like that. God. And there's that, I suppose it does have, and that can happen in the media where it's a gossip element and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it is very hard because we have had recently quite a few murder suicides and things like that, so that does muddy the waters and you're coming to a totally different thing. So I do get why people feel a certain way. Yeah. I mean, we're all nosy. As human beings, we want to know the ins and outs. The problem is, though, when somebody dies by suicide, what you're left with, for me as a mother, was left with questions. I'm often was left with guilt, which is a lot of people are, with guilt of not being able to get him the help that he needed.
Yeah.
Feeling judged. I mean, people, you see yourself when something happens, it's easy to stand on the sidelines and criticise, oh, well, it must have been whatever. There must be something going on.
Yeah.
Okay? Doesn't necessarily mean there's been anything going on. There could have been, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. So, as the person, you've lost someone and you're feeling all these things, guilt, shame even. And they say the stigma is going, but it's still there.
Yeah.
It's nearly like, I can remember people not wanting to tell their children that Brian had died. I remember my nephews, I think it was, being told that he was killed crossing the road.
Yeah.
Personally, I thought that was wrong, but I'm not their parents, so that wasn't it. Because someday they're going to find out the truth.
Yeah.
And
wonder, do you feel also that, are you allowed to celebrate Brian's life?
I can't tell you how much. I mean, there's a joy. That was the one thing I suppose I always wanted, was for him to be a part of our lives, and he is. I mean, even it's not so long ago, where occasionally I go to call my son Michael and I'll call him Brian. And I actually love when that happens, because I can't believe after 12 years I can still, his name slips out. So yeah. I really like that type of thing. We blame him on things that happen.
Right.
So if the washing machine breaks, Brian, we would talk to him, we have a bit of fun. My other 3 children, I don't know what I should share this. I think it's a good story. My daughter was in Saudi Arabia nursing, and one night I think myself, my husband, and Michael and Lynn were together, and she felt rather lonely. So she sent us a photograph, and in the photograph she had a stick man. And she said, "There's only me and Brian here." Okay? And the thing about that stick man became really, really important, because I ended up having another photograph of the 3 of them with the stick man. The stick man became a tattoo that the 3 of them got, because the stick man was Brian.
Yeah, that's great.
And my younger son, has it here, so that if he was drinking a pint, the stigma I could see, and it was those type of things. So that's like part of our humour. We always talk about it. We still get sad, and we have our times, like, but we have joy because he was a monkey. He gave us some great fun, and so yeah, he's still a big part of our lives.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah. And so you said earlier, you wish you'd known then what you know now. What kind of things you wish you'd known?
I think actually realising that what he was doing was serious. I know it sounds mad when I look back at it. It doesn't really make sense when I say this, but I really didn't think he was going to kill himself, even though he had attempts. You know?
He had previous attempts.
Yeah. And, I didn't. Did I think he was. I don't know whether I thought he was looking for attention. I don't know. But I didn't actually think he would do it. What I have learned is that particularly males will, if they don't succeed, often what males will do is they will go on the next time, they'll do something more severe the next time. Yeah. So there's a lot of contradictions in this, but that's often a case with males. And males will often do hanging, shooting, stuff like that. So that's one of the reasons why I suppose more males would actually die and not live through it. And yeah, it was just, I suppose, if I was to look back on it, I wish I'd have had somebody to listen to me.
Yeah.
That was, as a mother, I only spoke to the lady yesterday. She ran about her son suicidal. And yeah, I probably go a little bit overboard, but I just felt every time I speak to a mother like that, I feel I'm in their shoes. Yeah. And I will do anything that I can do to help them and to guide them to get the better help. I wish I hadn't been afraid to stand up to the medical profession and say, my son needs help now, instead of waiting.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I didn't I could say this, I'm sorry for using this kind of language, but I should have made a bloody nuisance of myself.
Yeah.
I have said that to people. You sometimes have to go, you don't get the help. You have to keep going back. I think that's one of the hardest things nowadays, is that how many times we hear of people that have gone to the hospital or whatever, sent home, and then later we hear they've died of suicide.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's it's actually quite complicated, the whole thing. So, yeah, I just wish there was just some follow, kind of a circle, a cycle that you can follow, or whatever, that if this doesn't work, this is what we do. Mm-hmm. And you have a support. As I said, my biggest problem is I thought nobody listened to me. The other thing that happens if you have somebody under over 18 in the class of an adult, you can forget about it, because usually they won't talk to you. So that causes a lot of problems as well.
The medical profession won't talk to you if they're over 18?
No, yeah, most cases that's the case. Because don't forget, they're an adult.
Right.
They're entitled to, they don't have to tell you anything.
Yeah.
I'm not going into it, but that does raise other things where you've had cases of people with serious mental health being sent home and stuff like that. So yeah, I think a lot needs to change. And I think while we do have people that have very, very serious mental health problems, a lot of the cases of, you'll have people that die by suicide that it actually could have been sorted. In the sense that they got the right help, the right direction. But if you've got nobody that will listen to you, that's very hard. And that's one of the big thing. I didn't know what I was going to do when I started doing this, but the one thing was that I wanted to. I thought, if maybe we listen to people, then find a direction. That was the one thing. No direction. Nobody telling you what to do or how to get the help that you needed. to sort out the different problems.
Right. So, like, you immediately got involved with SOSAD after.
Yeah, after about 2.5 months.
Yeah, and you set up SOSAD in Navan, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny because it started off with a computer in my kitchen dining room and an emergency phone. And emergency phone, I look back and I think, what was I thinking of? I mean, I'm going through all my own grief, and I can remember my first call I ever got. I know the day, it happened on St. Patrick's Day, 2009, and I know the person that rang me became a really good friend of mine.
Yeah.
But I nearly had a heart attack, which was because I thought, I don't know what to do with her.
Yeah.
So I listened.
That was as important as anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I allowed her be, and it ended up that way. At that time, we'd no office or anything in Navan. So what I did was we met every Wednesday in the New Grange Hotel. We had coffee and we spent maybe 3 hours there. And I would just let her cry or whatever she needed to do. And it was nearly like we held each other up. And excuse me, we could let those emotions out without anybody telling us to be quiet or that we were upsetting somebody else. I think that was a big part of it too, was listening, being able to talk about things that had happened leading up to the suicide and stuff like that. And yeah, I think we helped heal each other.
And is that what SOSAD is about? Is to help people?
Yeah, people that are suicidal, anybody is finding life. You know, you don't have to wait to be suicidal to come to SOSAD.
Yeah.
You could come to SOSAD if you're finding that you're struggling, maybe relationship problems, maybe you're having financial problems. Think of the reasons we all need help sometimes for any problem you can think of in the world. So that's why mental health is so hard to talk about, because it covers so many different areas. It could be sexuality, it could be relationship, as I say, financial. There's just everything across the board. And the one thing I will say, which I think is really important, and people are a bit surprised by this, is that the first thing that happens when things start going wrong for us is our well-being starts to fall apart. And that is our sleep, our diet, our minding and looking after ourselves, our self-care. Yeah. And if you imagine if you had, the way we have a baby and a baby gets overtired and gets cranky, I think as adults we're not really any different. And if you go to a period of time where you have no sleep and you're not feeling great and you have thoughts maybe of, I can't cope with this anymore, I don't want to be here. As the sleep worsens, the thoughts can worsen because you can't cope. You know yourself what it's like if you missed a couple of nights sleep. That's just a simple thing. And I always say to people, if we were to look after ourselves the same way as we look after your car. So your car, you have to get an NCT test. We should be getting our bloods done. So one of the first things I would say to people, and blood pressure and stuff like that, is when they come to us, have you been to your GP? Okay. Even if you're feeling you just want someone to chat to, I always say, if you haven't been to the doctor in a long time, go and get that good NCT done yourself. Check your bloods, blood pressure, all that type of thing. It gives you an opportunity to talk to your doctor in case you're having problems with your sleep or whatever. The blood can rule out things like vitamin deficiencies or being anemic, vitamin B12 deficiency, all that sort of thing, or maybe thyroid so that's a really important thing. The other thing about your car is you will make sure that you have petrol in a petrol engine. You will also make sure that you have plenty of water in it and you have oil in it. We need to do the same with our bodies. If we don't put the right fuel in, it's not going to work. So
bad eating habits could lead to bad mental health.
You'll find what happens is it's all extremes often. So you can have somebody that can't sleep at all, You can have, on the other hand, somebody that is sleeping too much. And it seems that's all they want to do. Then on the thing of food, you can have somebody that's not eating enough, that's skipping meals. And then you can have somebody that's overeating. You can have someone that maybe goes all day without eating and binges at night.
Yeah.
Then you bring in the substances that come in, which are quite common nowadays. So weed, cocaine, massive alcohol, and then you're on nothing again. So, for instance, with weed, if you are smoking weed like you would cigarettes and stuff like that, it takes away your oomph, your kind of get up and go in life. And long-term persistent use can lead to paranoia and all sorts of things. And it's extremely dangerous. I can't stress this. Like, that's the saddest thing I've seen is young people. I'm talking about young teenagers, 13, 14 years of age, going out smoking their bit of weed and stuff. I think everything's fine. And I wish they would realise it can take up to about 25, 30 before our brains are fully developed.
Yes.
And the sad thing I've seen is that, say, young people that start to maybe smoke weed at maybe, say, 13, to get into all that there. And by the time they say that you see them at 19, they can physically look like a 19-year-old, but emotionally, they're still at 13. So it's this sort of thing. So they're often the first things that we start to notice with a person. We'll often see anger. People, one of the big things is people isolating themselves. And interestingly enough, that's been the problem with COVID, because what COVID has done is it has given us a situation where we have to isolate. Yeah. Isolation is one of the problems of suicide. The other things to watch out for will be things like people talking about if they're not here, maybe talking about giving away possessions, things they own and stuff like that. Or some people will say, well, if that happens to me, you can have this. Other people might actually start to give away possessions.
Because you talked about something, the difference between suicidal thoughts and ideation.
Yeah.
What was the difference there?
Suicide ideation. Okay, let's go with the thoughts first, because that's probably the easiest way to explain it. If, for most of us, at some stage in our lives, if we're really, really honest, would have thought, I'd be better off I wasn't here. That's a thought.
Yeah.
It never was going to go anywhere. It was just a thought that came and went. And thoughts are fine. It's like any of us can have thoughts that we don't like, but it doesn't mean you could have a sexual thought. But that doesn't mean that you're going to do that thing.
Yeah.
Okay? The thing with the suicide ideation is that you end up, that it becomes in your head, this is the solution to your problem. And often what people do is then they will have a plan. They might know when, or this type of thing. So, for instance, one of the things, if we ask somebody if they're suicidal and they say yes, one of the things we would ask, do they have a plan? So the good thing about knowing if somebody has a plan is, if they say medication, for instance, it's a good idea to check what medications are in the house, remove anything that shouldn't be lying around, including across the counter meds. Okay?
Yeah.
If anybody is in the house that's on a lot of meds, lock them away. If a person's on medication, if they are on medication themselves, maybe have someone in the house take over, give them medication. The other thing that's often a good idea is, if that's not possible, is that the person only gets their medication once a week.
Right.
So they don't have the chance to stockpile.
Yeah.
But it's important to realise that you can do a lot of damage just by, it doesn't always have to be prescription drugs. I've seen people taking grandparents' medication. So it's about being conscious. If they've thought of shooting and stuff like that, whatever, shooting themselves. I know ammunition or guns are supposed to be locked away and all that sort of thing. Personally speaking, if you can't get rid of the guns, I'll be at least getting rid of the ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
What you're trying to do is make it difficult for them. Same with self-harm. Self-harm doesn't necessarily mean suicide, but if somebody self-harms, over a period of time, self-harm becomes less effective, and sometimes they will try something riskier. Okay?
I've seen self-harm being kind of on social media almost like it's a cool thing at times. It's like,
there is. I mean,
it's like,
social media it's difficult because you can go in, you can look at anything, on the internet, you can find anything you want. You will have groups that will self-harm in front of people, and we've had even known to have had suicides live on social media. And it is very hard, and it's just, I don't know, I'm not a doctor. I can only talk about the things that I've seen and things that I feel, but I do think a lot of times with the self-harm, it's because people will say that it's been a release for them. Because often they've so much anxiety built up in them that it's a bit like when they cut, it's what they feel. The pain gives a certain release, sometimes the sight of the blood, but also self-harm can be other things. And I think we're fixated on things like if somebody self-harms, they must be cutting themselves and things like that. Self-harm comes in many forms. It's not just the preconceived idea that people have about somebody cutting themselves. It can also be a case of you punching walls, banging your head off the wall, pulling your hair out, all those. And even to some degree, often people would use food and stuff, so as a form of control, and sometimes that's what it's all about. It's about taking control over something that they have total control of, and also having that release of, be it the release through some pain or by physically seeing something. And it is because the anxieties or whatever is built up so much in the body, they need to find a way to let it go.
Yeah. So if somebody is feeling suicidal, or they know someone who's suicidal, what should they do for help?
Okay. If it's an emergency situation, never, ever, ever be afraid to ring the ambulance and the guards. At the end of the day, what's the worst can happen? That person is alive and gets the proper help they want. People are afraid sometimes to make those decisions. And I have to say this, but I think it's really important. If you're in a situation where you have somebody that you're concerned about, make the decision from the beginning that if things get out of hand, I am going to contact the authorities. Don't, because if you've already made the decision, it's easier when the time comes than trying to think of what to do. So never rule out an emergency situation. Straight away getting help. So if a person comes and they're feeling suicidal and stuff, they should be medically checked first. And that means, in most cases, going to a GP, or in some cases, it means going to A&E.
Yeah.
Often what will happen then, you go to the GP will often refer you then to maybe the psychiatric department. For us would be the one here in Drogheda. Sometimes it was sent to A&E, and then A&E will link you in with the local psychiatric department. And then beyond that, once kind of the medical end of it sorted out, often what helps people is, depending what the circumstances are, but for a lot of people, talking therapy is really, really good. So going to see a counsellor or a therapist. So contacting a place like SOSAD, where you can go and you can learn to deal with what are the issues that are causing you to feel this way. And it's like if there's addiction involved, it often means that you have to go and get specialist help there. Probably the most difficult thing I would say to people is that often going to maybe, the hospital or somewhere, and then you find that you're sent home. We hear about this quite a lot. You sometimes have to go back okay? And keep going back until you get the right help. There's just something that's just come to my mind, which I think is really, really important, because it's something I come across quite a lot, and that is that people, not everybody needs medication. That's really important, but some people do. And what we find happens is people are put on medication, and not always. Some doctors are very, very good at explaining about medication and stuff like that. Others aren't. So it's good to know, ask questions. If the person that's feeling suicide is not well enough, that's where it's good to have a friend or a family member there to doing that support. Because often the person that is feeling suicidal is not in the headspace to be able to do the things for themselves. They might need somebody to advocate for them. Yeah. But what often happens is the doctor might prescribe, or the psychiatric department might prescribe a medication for, say, an antidepressant. And what we find happen is they might take it for a few weeks and they think it's not doing any good. And what they do is they stop taking it, but they never think of going back to the doctor or going back to the psychiatric department. Yeah. So if you look at it, if you had a chest infection and you went to the GP and they give you an antibiotic, it doesn't work. What do? You go back to the doctor, say that antibiotic didn't work. But people are not inclined to do that with their mental health. Yeah.
And so you'd say, don't be afraid to be an annoyance to the doctors or the medical profession or the emergency.
That's my one regret with my own son, that I wasn't more forceful, and that I was a bit afraid. A coward, to be quite honest with you. I suppose him dying gave me the courage that I didn't know I had.
Yeah.
And so, getting the medical attention. If somebody comes to you and they're suicidal, one of the biggest things you can do is just to listen.
Yeah.
Just listen to them. That's very, very hard to do. You have to listen without judgment, so non-judgmental. So you can hear a person tell you something that maybe you think, oh, for God's sake, we've all gone through that. Say a relationship as a young person, the relationship is broken up, and you can be kind of a flippant and say, oh, sure, we all went through that. You know, years ago they'd say there's plenty more fish in the sea and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So that person, that is their problem. Yeah. And by you undermining it or whatever, that's why the listening is so important. Yeah. Don't keep the stuff to yourself. So don't take on the whole responsibility. If you think this person's at risk, get the help. Get outside help. Don't hold on to yourself, because then you will end up sick with worry, trying to keep an eye on this person. It has come down sometimes with people. If it's a case that you have gone to a doctor, the person is suicidal or home, sometimes you have to sit. And if you want to use the word suicide watch, you have to do that. But I think it's important. I can't stress enough about going back. Okay? Because I think, and it's like with the medication stuff, if it doesn't work, just like with your antibiotic, go back and say, this is not working for me.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's treating this and looking at the same way as if the person, say, was having a heart attack or something, or they've broken their leg. If you broke your leg and you go and you get a cast on and you're in dreadful pain and it's not working, you're going to go back to the hospital, go back to whatever. Do the same with your mental health. And remember that it all links. So if you are feeling physically unwell, we often mentally don't feel great, and vice versa. The best description I can give, imagine that your body is like a bicycle, and that one wheel of the bike is your mental health, the other wheel is your physical health, and the frame and all that is what is the body that holds it all together. If you get something goes wrong with the chain, it's not going to work. So it's about trying to imagine what it's like, and one, they work in tandem.
Yeah.
So if one is not working out of sync, the rest of you are out of sync. A simple way of looking at it is, if you wake up in the morning and you have a head cold, there's nothing seriously wrong with you, but you're going to feel a bit down and a bit blue.
Yeah.
So the most important thing is, please, I can't stress this enough. Do not die by suicide because you are embarrassed or ashamed to actually say it. The amount of particularly men I have come across over the years that are actually the last thing they would do is admit to somebody that I'm feeling suicidal or I've thought of ending my life.
Yeah.
So the more you keep this in, and it's just that's what happens in families. That's where our problem is. You can't sometimes cope with this on your own. You need to go and get the experts involved. And if that means your GP, the hospital, if that means counselling, and counselling can be really good because it gives people an opportunity in a safe place to be able to say all the things that they need to say to somebody without judgment, without... And confidentiality, I think, is so important to be able to say something to someone and knowing that nobody else is going to know about it.
Yeah.
So, and as I said, if it doesn't work the first time you go, it's like with therapy. You can get a therapist, a counsellor, they can be really good. For some reason, you don't gel with them. But that doesn't mean you stop.
I've been there myself, I've gone through counsellors till I got a good one. Yeah,
it does take time.
Yeah.
And it can be a thing, it can be different types of therapy. People's different counsellors have different approaches. The other thing that's really important is not to have more than one therapy at a time. It can be quite dangerous going to two counsellors because you can be told they might eventually end up in the same place.
Yeah.
Okay? So the thing about it is not to be afraid to step outside, to seek the help that is there, and sometimes to just push yourself a little bit more.
Yes. And if someone comes to you, to listen without judgment.
Yeah, that's really, really important. Harder, easier said than done.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for talking to me, Marie, and it's been brilliant listening
I just
to
hope
you. And I found out a lot,
Yeah, it just, people realise that you don't have to be on your own. That there is, and if you don't get the help from the first person you're in, try somebody else.
Yeah. Great, thanks very much.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you.